Welcome to Mortification of Spin, a casual conversation about things that count, with Carl Trueman and Todd Pruitt, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. Let's join this week's conversation.
Welcome to Mortification of Spin. My name's Carl Trueman. I'm Professor of Biblical and Religious Studies at Grove City College in Western Pennsylvania, and I'm here as always with my friend and co-host, the Reverend Todd Pruitt, pastor of Covenant Presbyterian Church, a congregation of the PCA in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Good to see you, Todd.
Good to see you, Carl, as always. You're looking like kind of a Protestant Christian Michel Foucault, we might say. So.
Yeah, the hair has finally gone. I just decided in the summer, when it's over, it's over. So one Sunday after preaching, I went into the bathroom and I looked in the mirror and I really am a bald guy. I might as well just get rid of the whole thing. So
got to accept
it's all
man.
gone. Yes, yeah. I've embraced my bald destiny. So, well, it's a great pleasure to be here today. And we've got two special guests on. One of my other hats that I wear to cover my baldness on occasion is that I'm a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And I'm very honored and privileged to serve there with a number of very, very distinguished thinkers and writers. I feel often a little bit, I wouldn't say like a fish out of water, but a bit like an interloper. I'm really just a Reformation historian, but by an accident of history, I've somehow ended up at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And that's exposed me to and introduced me to the work of a number of extremely important thinkers and writers in the United States today. And it's a great honor to have on the program two of my EPPC colleagues. They're actually sisters in real life. First of all, there's Mary Rice Hasson, who is the Cato Burns Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Policy Center. And she's here with her sister, Theresa Farnan, who she said before, was like me, is just a humble fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. But great to have you two ladies with us today.
Delighted to be here.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for giving us your time. We want to talk to you about a book that Theresa was one of the co-editors on and Mary was a contributor to. And the title is Gender, Ideology and Pastoral Practice, a handbook for Catholic clergy, counselors and ministerial leaders. Now, I want to be upfront, of course, here. Most of you out there listening to us are probably Protestants, probably of a conservative or evangelical or reformed persuasion. This book it's written by Catholics, but I don't know of anything that does what this book does in the Protestant world. And I would say, with the exception of two chapters, nothing in this book would raise any eyebrows in conservative Protestant circles. And it's my hope that this interview will encourage as many of you out there either to get this book yourself or to encourage your pastors to get this book. I was a pastor between 2012 and 2018. I didn't come across the trans issue at any point during my pastoral ministry. Yes, pornography, yes, homosexuality, the sort of the standard things of 10, 15, 20 years ago. We've seen an absolute explosion in the last decade concerning men presenting as women, women presenting as men, Christians confused about whether they were born in the right body. This issue is a big one for pastors across the theological spectrum. And my guess is that if you're like me, you struggle to know where to turn. What about pronouns? What about new names? What about puberty blockers? How am I, as a Christian pastor, to love, care, and guide my people relative to these pressing issues? So first of all, Theresa and Mary, I want to say many thanks for being involved in this tremendous project. And then to ask the two of you, how big an issue do you think the trans issue is pastorally for the church today?
Yeah, so let me give you a little perspective, Carl, because Theresa and I have been working on this issue now for, close to a decade, but very intensely for the past 5 to 7 years. And when we first started talking about this, like you, a lot of pastors were skeptical that this was something affecting the people in their pews. And so early on, our task was to help people realize the scope, the fact that guaranteed there are people sitting in your congregation now who have a loved one who's experiencing either confusion or has gone down this path. And then now the challenge has shifted somewhat. I think partly because the proponents of transgender ideology have done a terrific job of trying to use Christian messaging to say that the compassionate approach, the life-saving approach, the loving approach is to affirm or validate someone in their rejection of their body, of their God-given sex, and then to accompany them down this path of transition. So giving people accurate information about what this really involves, speaking to them about very concretely about what it means to be a human being, something that certainly both of you have spoken about, Carl, you've written about extensively. That has proven really critical. But then saying, okay, now what do you do? You know, what people want to know, what do I say? And so that's something that this book really aims to address, to get into some of that nitty gritty. But also giving people that larger context of just how much of a significant problem this has become. It's affecting it. Well, I think gender ideology affects all Christians, all of us, because we're in the world, and it's our institutions have been so captured. Yeah, so there's no avoiding it.
And if I could add to that, it's interesting that you said you were a pastor until 2018, because 2018 was when we really noticed a sea change. I can vividly recall being at a conference. Prior to that, we would talk about this issue, and people in the audience would be kind of chuckling at the gender-red unicorn or shaking their head in disbelief. I was at a major conference in, what is regarded as a red state. I'm not going to say which one. And after I gave my talk, there was a line of parents who wanted to talk about their children and grandchildren. And that was the first time I had seen this. And this was in a red state that is one of the ones with a ban on gender affirming care. And I've been there again recently, and it's still just as bad. And I remember at that time talking to them, talking specifically about why you don't, their instinct was not to affirm, and why their instinct was correct, their intuition was correct. But at the same time, I remember speaking to a grandmother whose 12-year-old daughter was saying she was trans-identified. And she went to a priest who I know well and asked him, what do I do? And this priest, who is one of the, really a fantastic priest, said to her, well, you just need to love her. And I remember thinking, well, of course she loves her. That's why she's here asking. But that is absolutely inadequate for the moment, because right now you need to fight for your child, yes. Right? And you need to understand that not affirming is not a form of like being uncaring or unloving. It is loving your child enough to stand up to them. And so realizing that the clergy were ill-equipped, we started on this mission with the Person and Identity Project. And we have another co-founder, Susan Selner-Wright, who was one of the editors, who has been, walking with us this whole time, because she was involved in seminary formation and just really trying to get the tools in the hands of people involved in pastoral care. And as you mentioned, there are 2 chapters here that specifically deal with what the Catholic Church teaches. That's because we're dealing with dissent from within, as all churches are. But other than that, our big message is this is Christian anthropology. This is Judeo-Christian anthropology. We're all on the same page, and we need to be unified in giving these tools to our people.
Yeah. I should actually add at this point as well, we'll make sure that when this podcast goes live, we put some links up to some of the organizations that the two of you mentioned, so that anybody listening, go to our website. You can find links to get help if this is your particular struggle in your family. Sorry to interrupt there, Todd.
Yeah, no, I'm a pastor, and there's been so much helpful on this, and credit where credit is due. I think I heard Albert Mohler, gosh, this has been 7-8 years ago, where he said the T in the LGBTQ was going to be the biggest issue. And I thought, no, people aren't going to go for it. That's too out there. And it was at a conference, and he was saying, that watch for the T. This is going to be and it certainly has. And so I pastor a church in Virginia in the Shenandoah Valley, and I'm fielding issues like this all the time. Our youth ministry, thank God we have a wonderful youth pastor who is on this and really doing lots of anthropology, biblical anthropology with our young people. And we're doing it in our children's ministry as well. We're starting with our youngest little ones, and our children's ministry director, she's written a booklet that's been published by our denomination that starts at the very basics. If you're a girl, you're always going to be a girl, and then you'll be a woman. Things that we did not think
Right.
we would have to write 10 years
Right.
ago, we are now having to teach our youngest preschoolers. Um, just based on what you all have seen and the research you've done, what do you credit with kind of being most responsible for the rise of this phenomenon among so many young people, this sort of gender confusion? Where's this come from?
Yeah, I would say we talk about three avenues that really push this out particularly towards young people, but predominantly social media and the public schools. Healthcare has increasingly become a problem because pediatricians have been sort of co-opted by this ideology, and now they encourage parents to leave the room, and they start probing and having these conversations with kids that are validating them in these false beliefs. But I think what we've seen in a sustained way, what has really made so many kids vulnerable, is that from the earliest ages, we've seen this starting in, back in 2011, 2012, that many of the public schools, underneath the radar, parents didn't realize what was going on. There are so many good people who still have their kids in public schools or teach there or whatever, but this started being pushed through the teachers' colleges. It started coming in from outside groups that were brought in as experts into the schools. And so kids were being formed. You're, as pastors, formation is not a one and done thing, right? It's everyday. It's cultivating habits of mind, habits of thought. And that's what we saw the activists succeeding through the public schools. But then when you get to that early adolescence and teen years, that's where social media comes in like a ton of bricks, really just does a number on kids' confidence about who they are. And then you have all the peer pressure, but you have this steady stream of content that they don't have to go looking for. It's going to come find them. And so I think that those were things that perhaps parents and pastors, youth ministers, maybe underestimated just the significant impact of that. So unfortunately, there's been a little bit of a wake up, both in terms of the harms of social media and the schools. COVID opened a lot of people's eyes. But I think this is something that is not going to go away fast. And so I applaud your youth minister, your pastoral team that really was focusing on the young kids, because messaging the goodness of the body, the wonderful fact that God made you a boy or a girl, to be a man or a woman, we have to be intentional about those things that people our age took for granted because the culture was still reinforcing those messages.
And just to add to that, Carl, you've written extensively about this in your books, but nature abhors a vacuum, right? And if we push, if we push Christian anthropology out of the culture, what moves in? This anthropology of people that is based on this idea of like the isolated, autonomous individual ruled by desires, only answerable to his own will. So in public education, once they went all in for secularism and an agnostic stance to religion, that is the anthropology that has been holding sway. And we, as a culture, we thought there were people on the right who objected to the whole prospect of clinics handing out contraception, but we sort of bought into this utilitarian idea, like it's better to have contraception than for kids to be pregnant. But really what that was doing was setting the stage and serving up this moment where we have clinics who are helping, like guiding these children, shepherding them towards this idea of themselves where they can craft their own identity, independent of their faith, independent of their parents. And so that really set the stage for this, the whole mature minor doctrine, the agnosticism in public education. But then when you add to that social media, and I think, we're still in this crisis 5 years later after COVID, where our children feel so lonely and alone. So what do? They go online and they find a community of people. And so we as churches, our role needs to be that frontline community, right? I don't care what denomination you are. If you're not there giving community to your young people, they will go looking for it somewhere. And what they will find is so toxic.
Oh, it's so true. Wow. Yeah.
One of the things sorry,
no,
Mary.
go ahead.
No, I have a question, but carry on.
Yeah, I was just going to say that one of the things that I think has been has caused conflict sometimes for people who are in pastoral care is they look at young people and they say these young people are hurting, and they don't want to do something that's going to make them hurt more. And so one of the things that we tried to pull together in the book through the various chapters that addressed psychology, medicine, but also things about family, school, is helping people understand, go back to that basic truth of who we are. We're an integrated unity of body and soul. But you can't heal interior wounds with drugs and a scalpel, right? Interior wounds take interior healing. And so that painful, the pain that young people are experiencing, that sense of isolation that Theresa was talking about, the distress over their developing body and the highly sexualized culture and what that does to young women thinking about growing up, or young men wondering what it means to be a man. All those things are real, but we have better answers. So I think that's the thing we have to help pastors and parents be confident in the truth that, what we know about the human person really does give us that trajectory, that pathway of how to address these things with love.
Yeah. One thing that's popped up in Protestant evangelical circles, and I'm sure I've heard you speak on this relative to Catholicism, so I'm pretty sure you have a very close, very similar thing there. I've seen the term pronoun hospitality used, and I'm guessing for most people, one of the big challenges is going to be my friend, my child, my grandchild is claiming to be trans. They're wanting me to use their preferred pronouns. I know the answer you're going to give, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. How big a deal is that question?
Huge. It's a huge deal. The cast in the UK, when they were looking into shutting down the Tavistock clinic, and they've been embroiled in this multi-year debate over whether or not it's appropriate to give puberty blockers to children. One of the parts that was in the report issued by the expert pediatrician to the people in the UK was this observation that social transition should be considered a psychosocial intervention. And so using someone's pronouns, using the language of gender ideology, affirming someone, even just with your speech, even if you put up these guardrails, like we can't let you into these bathrooms, but we'll honor you with your pronouns, you are pushing them, you're reinforcing that false view of themselves, of that young person, and pushing them deeper into the transition. And so it's not a form of hospitality. It's a form of aiding and abetting self-harm. And that's what people need to realize. That's why we need to draw the line and hold the line. It doesn't mean you have to be unhospitable in your language. There are all kinds of terms of endearment. I'm from the Pittsburgh area. Like, you go through a checkout line and the cashier refers to you as hun all the time, right? Like, people use very hospitable terms when dealing with other people, even strangers, on a daily basis. Yeah. We don't have to be unkind with our language, but it's really important for pastoral workers, especially, to understand that is a very powerful psychosocial intervention when you use someone's pronouns or given names. And in doing so, you're pulling the rug out from under the efforts of the parents to reconnect the child with the truth about who they are.
I'll share a little vignette or a little anecdote from a young woman I know who is a detransitioner. And she talks about how in those initial first few months where she's expressing this trans identity, there was a lot of ambivalence. right? And yet when it's validated by people you respect, you care about, they start using your pronouns, they accept it as just, oh, this must be true. That confirmed in her, this must be true. But what she said that was so powerful was they were confirming my hatred of myself, that there was something wrong with me, that I needed to stop being me and somehow change because me wasn't good enough. Yeah. And so that's an important thing to remember too. What's the underlying thing that's happening here? It's a young person's rejection of who they are really as beloved by God, but they're not seeing that. And you have to untangle that. You have to get to those deeper layers.
Would you apply the same logic to proper names? I've sort of thought proper names are somewhat indifferent to me. People change their names. I have a granddaughter whose middle name is James because it's a family tradition, apparently. Sure. But would you apply the same to a proper name? If Dave decides he wants to be Davina, would you say you shouldn't use Davina?
I think it depends on the age. If you're talking about a minor, you don't want to do anything that, as Theresa said, is going to push them down this path, because we do have data from the UK, from some of the other countries, actually the Netherlands, Sweden, Finland, that this is a continuum. And so when you reinforce, starting with the social transition, you literally are setting the dominoes tumbling. So when young people are in that impressionable stage, anything you do that's validating that false belief is problematic. With an adult, let's say you meet a coworker who's already, quote, transitioned and they're expressing this, they've chosen a female name if they're a male. You know, adults can change their names. You can call them whatever. That's a different kind of a thing. I still wouldn't use the pronouns. But with a young person, and I would say not even just under 18, I would say anyone up through, their middle 20s, or a family member where someone is asking you to do this because they are expressing a trans identity. You know them well enough to say, look, I love you, but I can't support something that I know is so deeply harmful to you.
Yeah, and also for churches, there is something, we talk about this a little bit. We have a chapter on canon law, which again is applicable to Catholics. But I think it would be worthwhile for Protestant ministers to read it, because one of the issues we grapple with is the fact that when you are baptized as an infant in the Catholic Church, you are given a baptismal name, and then all of your sacramental records follow that, right? Like, so that's who you are. You're a juridical person. And then that carries forward even in terms of, being able to enter into the sacrament of marriage. When somebody transitions, right, and say they're, it's a man transitioning to identify as female, and then brings himself forward in the church, presenting perhaps very convincingly as a female with a female name, or as a woman with a female name, and seeking to marry in a church that still believes in a biblically based understanding of marriage, then you've got a problem, right? So I think it's important for Protestant denominations, maybe whatever structure you have for keeping track of identities, you need to be able to keep track of who someone is. And that's one of the issues that we delve into in this book, because this is the nitty gritty that you need to know when you're engaged in pastoral care.
Right.
Yeah. So, for example, schools, often Christian schools, will oftentimes enroll someone on the basis of the birth certificate. But we know in the majority of states, you can change the sex listed on your birth certificate, and there's no record. So churches need to keep some sort of their own records of the sex of this person, so that when you are marrying someone or whatever, at least in the Catholic tradition, we ask to see their baptismal records. So you have some independent source of knowledge as to who this person is.
Why is it, if I'm reading the headlines right, why is it that we are seeing some nations in Western Europe becoming more, for lack of a better phrase, more conservative on some of these issues and beginning to pull back now? And we aren't seeing that here in the United States. I mean, nations that do not have at all the sort of kind of Christian milieu that you still have hanging on in the United States. And they're beginning to now pull back on this. I think of England and a few other places.
Yeah.
And we don't seem to be there yet as a nation. What's going on?
Yeah. So medically speaking, one of the probably the only advantage to socialized medicine. Most of these countries have that. They have record keeping. And so when they started down this path of transitioning children, there were some physicians who were wrong on the anthropology. They were trying to do something they thought was good and helpful, but then they started to look at their data. They were keeping records and they realized, gosh, this isn't helping. This is not fulfilling the promise. And in fact, we're seeing harm. So they actually looked at the data and confronted that and realized this is, and then people started digging into the original research and found it was very thin. In the US, we have a problem because physicians, specifically in the gender space, the gender medicine group, they are financially incentivized to not only do more, but do this at younger ages, to offer more types of procedures and ancillary services, et cetera. Many of the gender clinics send their own people into the public schools, et cetera. So that financial incentive is huge. But I think also the media has been hugely bought into this. And with new media, X and such, we've seen some of that starting to break through. The truth is breaking through. But to the credit of those physicians over in principally the UK, Finland, Sweden, they simply looked at their patients and they said, this isn't working. The promise of this was based on the assertions of adults who had transitioned and said, gosh, I'm still unhappy. And the physicians were saying, gosh, this hasn't worked out very well. Maybe it would work better if we started when they were younger. That was the original rationale for the Dutch. It failed with adults, but hey, we're going to try this with younger. We wouldn't do that with anything else. If a regimen of chemo is not working with adults, you don't say, maybe it'll work on kids.
Yeah.
But that was what went wrong there. But again, to their credit, because they have these databases, the physicians with integrity looked at that and said, this is not what we were told it was.
Well, obviously this is we could go on easily, Carl, and I could go on easily with you all for another 2 hours. But I will just simply say this to our listeners. If you're a pastor, if you're involved in ministry, I really encourage you to get a copy of this book, Gender Ideology and Pastoral Practice. As we mentioned, it's the book's authors are Roman Catholic, but I'm telling you, I've been working through this book for about 4 or 5 weeks now, just going and steadily working through the chapters, and the vast majority of the real estate of this is perfectly helpful for any good Protestant out there. And I mean, a couple weeks ago, I was sitting in my chair in my living room working through the medical chapters and just groaning out loud, but being very helped. I mean, very equipped. Some of the stuff I knew, some of the stuff was new to me, and put in a way that was very helpful for me as a pastor, because I've got parents in the Shenandoah Valley asking me about this. They've got a kid struggling with this. And so the book is wide ranging from medical issues, philosophical issues, psychological issues, and Protestant pastors need really good sound equipping in these issues. And my fellow pastors, please get a copy of this. You'll be helped very much by it. Our guests have been Theresa Farnan and Mary Hassan. Thank you all so much for being with us. I'm really glad you're doing what you're doing. If you ever want to become Presbyterians, just talk to me. I'm here for you.
Talk to me. I'm in a better denomination.
But thank you for the chance to be here. We appreciate it.
Really grateful for this book. When Carl told me about it a couple months ago and I got a copy, as soon as I started working through the first chapter, I thought, oh, this is so needed. And I think Protestants, we're starting to catch up. We still have a lot of real estate to carry on, and this has been very helpful. So thank you. And to our listeners, I would say go to our website, mortificationofspin.org, and you can enter to win a copy of this very, very helpful book. And also, while you're there, if you'd like to make a contribution to the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals, so that we can continue to provide this sort of content for you, please feel free to do that. And until next time, we'll look forward to having you back on Mortification of Spin.
I looked in the mirror today. My eyes just didn't seem so bright. I've lost a few more hairs. I think I'm going bald. I think I'm going bald.
Thanks for listening to Mortification of Spin, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. For more on topics like this, visit mortificationofspin.org, where you can find other articles by Carl and Todd, browse the archive of past episodes, and make a donation. We'll talk to you next time on Mortification of Spin.